Today is November 29th, 2016. The topic is new information, why Trump won and why the pollsters got it wrong. This is called Athens Speakout, number 390. And the moderator is my wife, Lois Whaley, and she will restrict both Dave DeWitt and I to 2 minutes each in this long dialogue. Dave DeWitt represents the Athens News, active journalist, and I am a retired historian from Ohio University. This is Athens Speakout number 390. First question. Lois?
How about further questions and comments on why Trump won and why Hillary lost?
That's to Dave, right?
Okay. Well, I'd just like to bring us, first of all, up to date on our voting totals, because they are still being counted, and we do have a new total. Nothing's changed about the Electoral College vote, but our new popular vote totals are 62,513,667 votes.
In round figures, it's 62,500,000.
62.5 million.
5 million, yeah.
For Trump.
Right.
And for Hillary Clinton, 64,818,930 votes.
800,000?
So that's 64.8 million.
64.8, okay.
So in rounded numbers, that's 2.3 million more votes for
Right.
Hillary Clinton than President-elect Donald Trump. I don't know if I'm ever going to get used to saying that.
Unfortunately for the Democrats got all of their votes in California and New York.
Right.
And Trump had a better distribution in getting the Electoral College in more states.
Yes.
So do we have any figures on the states that Trump won?
Well, I know I could look them up, obviously. I don't know them offhand.
We'll get them. We'll get them.
We can get into
I think
that
I might have put it
at
on
a
one of our
later
earlier
date.
shows.
Yeah. But in essence, he won by a couple thousand in New Hampshire. I think he won by about a couple dozen thousand in Wisconsin. In these states where it mattered, where they're looking at the recount, he won by, anywhere
Well,
from...
do you think the recount can change it?
I don't expect it to.
Neither do I.
But I think it's a good thing to do, nevertheless. Jill Stein's raised the money to do it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it for the official record. I don't expect it to change the results.
A citation for next time.
Right.
It's just like the Gore-Bush election in Florida and the Kerry election in Ohio. You just keep citing the corruption of the boards of elections. That's where the problem is, the board of elections in some states.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because the way our systems work is that it's entirely reliant on these local countywide boards of elections throughout the country to oversee the election.
Well, not
directly.
entirely. There was a civil rights law in 1965, and that was
I'm talking about the carrying out of the actual election itself, the decision of what
Right.
equipment's used and how it's used,
But
what companies
the
it's
Roberts
bought
Court
from.
has
It all happens at the county level.
Weakened it. The Supreme Court
well,
has a duty to enforce that.
Yeah, in Shelby County versus Virginia, the Roberts Court gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I think that they did horrible damage to the Voting Rights Act. They made it easier to suppress the vote,
Right.
Especially the vote of black people, and I do believe that it did have an impact. I don't know.
Every vote counts.
Every vote does count.
And those Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota votes were only a couple of thousand.
Right.
And was only done in the last 3 days.
Yeah.
If Hillary had more energy and went out there, she might have won.
Yeah, I mean, it turns out, I think that we need a Voting Rights Act after all. And I think the court made a terrible decision with Shelby County.
And we got to change the Supreme Court.
And, yes. Not much opportunity to do that right now. I think right now we just have to be hoping that Stephen Breyer and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and even Anthony Kennedy are taking their vitamins, and hopefully they'll still be with us throughout the Trump government, as it were. Because he's already going to be replacing Scalia, Antonin Scalia, with what he promised to be a Scalia-like.
Well, that remains to be seen
Justice.
whether we can have some hearings.
Right.
There may be
And-
some Democratic. It has to be approved by the Democrats. They have a voice.
Well, they can filibuster it, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's about the only tool we have in our toolbox.
I'm not making any prediction on that. I don't make any prediction of what's going to happen the next 100 days.
The first 100 days of the Trump presidency,
Yeah.
or the next 100 days in
Well,
general?
Trump. We'll assume
Yeah.
that Trump. Well, we'll assume that Trump is inaugurated.
Right.
That's pretty clear.
On January 20th.
But who he's got in the cabinet and what he's going to do in the first 100 days is a big question mark.
Yeah.
And he may make some boo-boos.
I think he's already making some boo-boos.
Oh, we'll discuss that in the future sometime. Okay, Lois, am I on the stage?
I guess so. I've been hearing you talking for some time. Keep right on.
Okay. So the question is what additional comments I may have on why Trump won and why Hillary lost. And I cite a new personality to me, a TV Fox newscaster by the name of Lee Vintard. I never read him, never heard him until just this last week. And he gave the best defense for Trump on the 24th of November, 2016. It's kind of an official defense. He had personal biographies of Trump, and he's close to the sources of Trump's power. So the Republican National Committee, so critical on November 7th, mostly all quickly returned to the great leader after the votes came in. Even Texas Senator Ted Cruz and possibly Governor Kasich are showing a bit of independence, but that bit is getting smaller. Anyway, in October, back when Chris Wallace predicted that Hillary was a sure winner, I ignored my own previous advice. Do not follow polls. Trump ignored the mass media and did what Harry Truman did in 1948, go directly to the voters. What Trump did was something new. He not only put his own speeches out on the hustings, what do they call that? Like
Hustings, I
hustings,
think.
yeah, the hustings. He already did it on the campaign trail, which Harry Truman did. Trump had a new TV device. He could put infinite number of speeches on Facebook and Twitter, and he could get thousands of volunteers of 18-year-olds to fill up Twitter and Facebook with nonsense. So he had less than 1,000 of these students were less than high school graduates, and sometimes they were high school graduates, and they were unemployed, male blue-collar workers, and they stuck signs up, and they got on Twitter. And the workers put up these signs between Athens and Cincinnati. Hillary didn't have any signs, and she didn't bother with Twitter. I don't know what she's going to do next time, but anyway, all of these put up these signs, went from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to Pittsburgh, from Pittsburgh to California, and that's how Trump kept racking up more popular vote. So Trump's propaganda was through the Fox channel and Roger Ailes. And they put on one of the cheapest propaganda campaigns in the history of American presidential politics. During the previous 2 weeks, Chris Wallace and the New York Times predicted that Hillary had 93% chance of winning. And that was based under the old Democratic-Republican Party rules. But Trump had new rules.
I can remember when people said that signs were beside the point. They kind of gave up on signs.
That when you say they, you mean the old party, Republican establishment,
Well,
Democratic.
I just remember people saying that,
Right.
those signs didn't really change people's minds and
Yeah.
so on.
That's right.
But I don't think we've ever seen a blitz like that
Yeah.
for the presidency.
That's right. This is
Usually
new.
those signs
This
are
is
for
new.
local offices.
Yeah.
That's right.
True.
That's right. So, Trump was smarter than he appeared to be. New York Times overrated themselves and underrated Trump's political savvy. He was campaigning since 1987.
1987?
Yeah, he made various experiments. He changed his party 5 times. And he went on television to get television exposure on this pornographic show, okay? And all of this is preparation of how to campaign for the presidency.
I wish you would have prepared by reading the U.S. Constitution.
That's unfortunately the problem. That's right. So this is what I learned from Fox
From the Fox News.
and Ailes.
And Roger
Because you see,
Ailes.
what they did, Ailes and Fox, is we're not going to wait for a caucus in Iowa and New Hampshire, the official. We're going to have TV forums. And they opened these TV forums in June of 2015. So there were 17 Republican candidates up there talking away. Well, a couple of Democrats got in there, and they were going on TV, at least getting TV exposure. But Fox and Ailes was putting on much more Republican exposure, okay? So Trump whittled away, 17 candidates down to 10, down to 8, down to 5, and he won in Indiana. He won the primary by May. He won the primary through just repeating, like Hitler, the same old lines. I'm going to win. I'm going to win. I'm going to win.
Meanwhile, the news media were pointing out a lot of the shortcomings that he had, and they were repeating his name over and over again.
Right.
Yeah, the free publicity.
Right.
So I'm wondering, David, what your take on that is. Do you have some other ideas about why Trump won?
Well, I think if you look at the long arc over the past year, I think that really does come into play because Trump got so much media exposure by being outlandish and basically being a good story that he didn't have to spend nearly as much money as other candidates. If he was outspent by Hillary by a huge margin, he didn't have to have a ground game that
He was
traditional
outspent
candidates have.
officially, but
Right.
that doesn't include
That doesn't include the that does include the dark money and the PAC money and the buying and legalized political bribery of our
Citizens
election-
United, the Supreme
the
Court.
Citizens
Got to come back
United
to that.
and McCutcheon rulings. But I do think that the significant media exposure does play a role. He didn't have to have the ground game that you would usually have to reach voters. He was able to get on anytime he wanted to reach voters. He was able to get on TV and reach voters. They would constantly, every morning I woke up and turned on CBS This Morning. He was there. Just waiting for me to ruin my day initially, just by saying something baldly stupid right off the bat. I had to start every day with that. And so I do think that, yeah, that media exposure had an impact. And I don't know, it's kind of the nature of the beast with journalism when you have this garish figure going around saying all these controversial things. It's hard not to cover that. Because that's what people want. That's what they click on. That's what they read. That's what they tune into. every so often now and then in Athens County here, we get somebody who wants to have an all good news newspaper. And it always fails because people don't want just good news. They like to rubberneck. They like to see the monster, as it were. And he was great material for that at the expense of the Republic, probably.
And the few counties in Ohio that went for Hillary were the university towns, and some of the big ones,
In
like
big cities, yeah.
where they subscribed to the New York Times. But Meigs County, Vinton County, never heard of the New York Times or the Washington Post. They look at TV. TV is easy. Look at TV, don't read. You don't have to read anything. Well, another fact which I like to bring in that's entirely new is physically, Trump had more stamina than Hillary. And FDR and Lyndon Johnson showed this same stamina. Hillary just wanted to be the first woman president. And she was too dependent on Barack Obama for additional campaign talks. She also had the assistance of Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, vice president, Tim Kaine, vice presidential candidate, and even Michelle Obama. Well, they probably got some votes, but there's nothing like the candidate himself. Johnson went around and shook more hands than any other Democrat when Johnson was from Texas. And he had enough oil money to buy his trips, okay?
So you're saying that Trump was like Johnson in that respect?
He got around to the voters, shook more hands. Hillary wasn't shaking many hands. That's her problem. She was dependent on the establishment, two establishments, or the elites, the Republican elite, the Democratic elite, the New York Times, the Washington Post. They were going to push her over the top.
I'm wondering about the so-called fake news. Nowadays, they're recently, since the election, they've talked about some news that was not real news.
You're talking about internet. You're talking about.
I guess it was
talking about the
mostly
Russians.
on the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were, and we've seen a lot more
Hacking.
about that. I almost wish that there were more reports about the fake news before the election, or at least as many
Right,
that we've seen
yes.
since then. At least something to warn people about all this barrage of nonsense that they were seeing. And somewhat disturbingly, since the election, we just saw over the weekend that the president-elect himself appears to buy into these fake news stories because he was claiming that millions of illegal immigrants voted for Hillary and he would be winning the popular vote if these millions of voters didn't vote. Well, he has no evidence for that. And the reason why he doesn't have any evidence for that is because there is no evidence for that. And this entire idea about millions of illegal immigrants voting was generated by a fake news website. And a fake news story shared and reshared on Twitter. And so it's a little disturbing to me that he is willing to go out there and be irresponsible and claim that millions of people were voting in this election who shouldn't legally be voting. And paradoxically, he was making this case in an argument against the recount efforts. Well, if you're out there charging that millions of people illegally voted, that would be an argument for a recount, not against it. But I digress. Either way, I think it's really irresponsible of him to be perpetuating these false or fake news myths that seem to reverberate throughout the right-wing echo chamber. And even beyond that, I think that he needs to have a better understanding of the voting laws in the United States of America. You can call up any single one of the Secretary of States in any of our 50 states, and they will tell you that illegal immigrants are not allowed to vote legally.
California seems to be what Trump has in mind, because the California vote was so strong for Hillary, and of course that's an area where there are a lot of Mexican immigrants in California. So he was sort of implying, I think,
Yeah.
which the California people did not like.
Right. Well, no, but thankfully I do have one rule of logic that it's called Hitchens' razor that I try to go by.
Hitchens?
That which can be asserted without evidence can be
I've heard of
dismissed
Occam's razor, but who's
This is Christopher Hitchens.
what was that? What was this?
What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. That's Hitchens' razor. And I think it's
Hopefully.
applicable to this case. It's applicable to a lot of what Donald Trump says.
Yeah.
Well, what about the recounts? You alluded to recounts. Are
Yeah.
there actual recounts going on?
It looks like Jill Stein has raised the money to do at least the Wisconsin recount, and I think they're looking to do recounts in Michigan and Pennsylvania as well. They'll have to raise more money to do that. But like I said at the beginning, I don't expect the recounts to change anything. They might change, a couple hundred votes here or there.
Oh, let's say
I
she
don't
takes the
think they'll change.
recounts. She's just counting Jill Stein. She's not counting Hillary's vote.
Well,
No,
You see if they go
it's
through.
the overall.
Well, supposing she raises her 1% to 2%.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to make a difference.
But it makes a difference with Hillary's votes. And
Yeah.
Hillary,
Oh, as in
wins the
Hillary,
state.
Yeah.
supposing Jill Stein's work leads to Hillary's.
Well, I think that's the idea. I don't think Jill Stein's launching this effort for herself, honestly.
Well,
I
then
think
they'll
that
give
she's
an
doing
argument
it-
for Hillary.
I think
to
she's doing it because it's more palpable from a PR standpoint for Jill Stein to launch the
Yeah.
recount effort than it is for Hillary to do so.
Yeah. Well, it's a desperate move, in my opinion.
So
I think we have-
Wisconsin is the one that I think is actually going to begin on Thursday,
Mm-hmm.
it said.
Right.
But it costs something like $3 million.
Yeah.
She's raised
that was the
private
figure
money
I
to
saw,
get it.
over $3 million that she raised for the recount effort.
Yeah. Well, I go back to the fundamentals. Hillary worked hard for advertising the rights of blacks, Mexicans, college-educated women, but ignored the male, down-and-out voter. And that is very significant. Hillary, in her last month, was speaking to Trump's negatives. She did not speak enough about her positives and what she was going to do in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan to tell the whites, working class, how are they going to get new jobs. That's a flaw in Hillary's super optimism. Hillary began by admitting her past mistakes about foreign trade debts, but that admission came too late and only with pressure from Sherrod Brown from Ohio and Bernie Sanders, from Senator from Vermont, and Elizabeth Warren. So there were Democrats to the left of Hillary. So Trump told lies about China and Mexico and the Middle East, but Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini proved that people who are unemployed or employed at minimum wage will vote for a demagogue who sounds confident that he can fix the unemployment problem. And that's what Trump has got an outside chance of doing. And it's been suggested that he might be a closet fascist. Anyway, the middle class, this is where the historian is important. The pollsters all look for the future and they don't pretend the past doesn't count. And that is a big mistake. The middle class of Germany and Italy lost their savings from 1920 to 33 because of war debts. And what's behind this problem are war debts. which Hillary has not really addressed. She is somewhat of a hawk. She got involved in Yugoslavia. She got involved in Iraq and Iran and Pakistan, and even personally got involved in Libya. So she hasn't got a well thought out foreign policy of how do you solve the Middle East problem and the wars on terrorism.
We've been at war one way or another at least since 2003. It hasn't been a let-up, although people were brought back from Iraq by President Obama. But the war continues. War on terror just keeps going and going and going.
Well,
And
yeah.
building up the debt.
My guy Gore Vidal wrote a book called Perpetual War for Perpetual Peace, kind of mocking that idea of, you know, the war on terrorism. It's justification for the military-industrial complex in the 21st century, you know. It's justification to continue these extreme war debts. It's interesting, you'll appreciate this as a historian. I was reading about the Phoenician state of Carthage recently. And after Scipio Africanus sacked Carthage and overthrew it, and the Roman Republic at that time demanded that Carthage could no longer raise an army. That was one of the conditions of their surrender, in addition to get rid of the city overall. But this led Carthage, because they had no longer had this cumbersome military to support, to experience an extreme economic boon after they were sacked, because they didn't have to pay for this military anymore. It just got me thinking about how much money we invest in the military and this idea of safety. Now, you can make good arguments that there's really no way to
So
put
Carthage survived for another 200 years,
Yeah, until, of course, they were
overrun by the Vandals.
Yeah. But it's just interesting that there is a tangible economic benefit to rolling back the military-industrial complex that we don't see very often these days. But of course, you know, with things like what happened yesterday at Ohio State and things, you know, the various dangers all over the world, it's very tough to put Pandora back in the box, as it were, with regard to the military-industrial complex.
Well, that lesson of economics was proven to me by the case of Switzerland and Sweden. The Swedes have the longest record of staying out of wars since 1815. They've never been involved in wars. So when you have World War I, the Swedes made money selling to both sides. World War II, they made money selling to both sides. So war does not pay. War destroys property and lives.
Right.
Same way with Switzerland. They made profits. Now, the Vietnam War was extended the same problem. The United States went through World War I and World War II being winners because in both wars they got in late. So they could reap the benefits and collected the debt in 1914. And in the 1914 war, the big powers had already bankrupted themselves, and they were still the latest in 1941, after the British and the Russians
After everyone else was
were
already
fighting.
in the game, yeah.
So they destroyed themselves through war. And then, now, Vietnam, the tables were reversed because the Europeans, the Germans, the Japanese were building on their civilian economy under Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, and I could see that war does not win. War is a loser. And we have the largest debt forever, and the Vietnam War has extended the debts, and then George Bush, 43, doesn't learn anything from history, nothing about the debt, and fights for 8 years in the Middle East against Afghanistan, and the money keeps going down. Neither candidate, neither Trump nor Hillary, address the problem of the national debt. That's going to hit us again with Janet Yellen in December. She's going to raise the interest rates.
Well, yeah.
Maybe so.
And Trump's plan, I mean, honestly, and Hillary did point this out during the debate. She made a somewhat disingenuous claim that her plan wouldn't add a penny to the debt. That's not true. It added a couple $100 million to the debt, according to the independent analysts. But Trump's plan adds $5 trillion
Wow.
to the debt. And so for those debt and deficit hawks that we've seen over the last 8 years, complaining about the Barack Obama presidency, it will be interesting to see how critical they are of the Trump regime.
Rather than calling them deficit hawks, I would call them definist Calvinists.
Okay.
Pay your debts. Neither a borrower nor a lender be.
Oh, some Hamlet there.
Yeah.
Polonius. Yeah.
Now that came out in this campaign. Trump, I thought, was a poor Presbyterian because he kept talking about sexual misbehavior, and I thought he was a terrible, underinformed Presbyterian. But there was a secret agenda that I missed. Trump's attitudes toward alcohol, because of his brother and his sons and his daughters, demonstrated that he was a better hardline Calvinist on the economic question behind the scenes. And that was missed by the
fact that he doesn't drink?
Well, the drinking and the carousing is only a symbol of spending money on luxuries, okay? Mm-hmm. It's got to do with the debt, okay? Where do you invest your money? Okay, why did the Calvinist countries, Switzerland, Scotland, and Britain, go ahead of the Catholic countries? This was back during the Protestant Reformation. The Catholics didn't have interest. They used to consume and spend what they produced. Now, the Calvinists had a funny kind of a religion. They said, well, we're not going to take any interest, and we're not going to spend on conspicuous consumption. We're not going to spend on wealthy houses and entertainment and so forth. So no drinking, no partying, no nothing. The only thing you can do with your money is save it. Well, that makes that merchant
Investing, right?
that makes that merchant richer for his sons. And they have capital to invest. So this is called the Protestant work ethic. But it was really the Jewish work ethic. They invented this.
Well, I think we ought to point out that it's a little bit past half time,
Okay.
gentlemen. So how about saying some more about how the pollsters got it wrong?
Well, let's interrupt this halftime and introduce ourselves, because I am Robert Whaley, retired historian, who looks at the long-run trend of history. And on the other side, we have Dave DeWitt, a current journalist, who's learning a little bit of history in this campaign, I hope, working for the Athens News. Okay, now get to you. Lois, what's the question? Who's on board here now?
These pollsters, how'd they get it wrong?
Yeah. Am I on board, or is he on board?
How did the pollsters get it wrong?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I
You
want
can
to
go.
say a little bit more about this religion and Methodism and Hillary's weak interpretation of Methodism. She was flawed because her critics never said anything about, or let's say the Trump critics suggested that she was a heavy drinker. But she pretended to be a loyal Methodist. Well, I have some questions about her loyalty to the old Methodist religion, because the Methodists seldom got drunk. So I'm not sure that Hillary was this good Methodist that she claimed to be.
Maybe that's some of this fake news. that
Maybe
we've
it
been
is. Maybe it
hearing
is.
about. Could
But
be.
let's get back to this GLBTQ interest group. which turned off traditional Christians, especially married women with children. And those married women voted for Trump. This sex, everything is sex. Both candidates, both parties have been obsessed with sex for 30 years. Goes back to the New Left. Trump
At
didn't
least.
invent this. He just added to it.
However, the New Left did not invent sex, as far as that's concerned.
No, but they extended the so-called feminist revolution.
Yeah,
And it became more vulgarized, more open. Okay.
that could be, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
How about hearing from David now a little bit more?
About the New Left and sex?
Well, no, you can go to any topic you want.
Okay.
That's my little pet peeve. I'm a minority of one. Everybody else is still for pleasure. They're still putting on theater.
I think that, well, I don't know. I think that this election was more about economics and people growing desperate in their lives and the perception that the ruling elite doesn't really care about the rest of them than it was about culture. I don't think that this was an extremely culturally motivated election. I could be wrong, I suppose. I don't really have any evidence, except for my impression throughout the entire election cycle is that people were bucking against the parties, the control of power, the power centers within Washington itself, the traditional power centers. And I think that they felt a frustration with the power centers. I think they felt ignored. I think that they will be surprised or may be surprised, or maybe they won't be surprised to find themselves continuing to be ignored once the Trump administration takes effect. I don't think that they are expecting the types of policies that are likely to come about. Take, for instance, the selection of Georgia Representative Tom Price as his Health and Human Services Secretary. Tom Price has put out his proposal to replace Obamacare, and what it includes is voucherizing Medicare and block granting Medicaid. These are old Republican leftovers. They're not new ideas. They roll back the New Deal. They cut benefits. They hurt people, essentially. And so these people who voted for Trump expecting some sort of change are really only going to find themselves cut as far as government services, government benefits, their health benefits. Millions of people will lose their health insurance in the plan that Tom Price has proposed. They're going to prioritize high deductible healthcare savings accounts. They're going to bring back the mini-med token insurance that leaves people economically decimated in the case of medical catastrophe. There's nothing that I've seen in the Trump government so far with who he's picking for his cabinet members to indicate that he plans to help working people in any way whatsoever. And so it'll be interesting to find how people react to that when they've once again, they've said that we reject everything that Washington is right now and we want change. Well, the change that they're going to see is not
No
really
change
change
at
at all.
Yeah. Change your suit of clothes. Meaningless.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go to the problem of why the polls got it wrong on November 8th. All polling data is biased, and the statistics are inherently rigged. One has to ask himself 3 questions. Who words the sample questions presented to the voter? Second, who finances these surveys? And third, who pays for the further additional ads to put on television, repeating and exploiting the storyline with these loaded questions? And the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and every governor and every senator hires his own pollster to game the system. So Well, I guess what I'm saying is Hillary depended too much on the previous New York Times polls and believed, well, 93%, I guess I can coast. I'm in. I'm going to be in. Anyway, why work so hard? I'm in. Well, you know, Dukakis was fooled by that same over-optimism. He was governor 3 times in Massachusetts. And in his third race, the pollsters said, 2 weeks before the election, he's 10 points ahead. This Irish lower-class challenger couldn't catch him. Suddenly, this guy catches him up in the last 2 weeks and defeats Dukakis for his re-election. That was because Dukakis was overconfident of his own superiority, arrogant, and he let it go. The next time he came back, he got a new campaign manager who got a new pollster and didn't take anything for granted. And he did a better job at keeping a tight race in 1988 down to California. The California vote was decisive, but he lost.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, you knew.
I knew him, and I knew
Personally,
something about polling. And of course, I learned polling in Ohio in my campaign against Clarence Miller in 1972. You see, I only had $5,000 to spend. That's all the contributions I could get from cans at the quarter here and a quarter there from 12 county fairs, plus a $20 bill from one of my colleagues in the history department or something. I got 2 $50 contributions. Most of them were 5, 10, and even quarters, okay? Well, anyway, Clarence Miller, who was the incumbent, could afford a little house trailer in every county fair. And he had a polling thing. He'd poll everybody combined. Take this poll. What do you think about gun control? 90% or 70% would say, vote, I don't want them. And then Trump would, come and say, well, that's the way I voted. Look at my voting record. Do you believe we should extend the national debt? No, I don't want the national. I've always voted against the national debt. No question whatsoever on Vietnam. That's not in his poll, see?
Right.
So then the reporters would come around to me and say, well, where do you stand in the polls? I said, I don't have any polls. I can't afford to pay a pollster. He costs money.
Right.
So I knew that polls were fixed from the word go, as soon as I got into it. And then I could read back in history and see how it was done to Truman. And I didn't pay much.
Right, I remember all year long you've expressed skepticism about the polls.
Yeah, right. And then Chris Wallace fooled me because he said, it's very close to the end now. And he had a good argument that, see, Hillary said that she would accept the results, and if she lost, she would accept and honor the winner, Trump. And Trump played his old demagogue, see. He said, well, I'll see what happens before I endorse.
Yeah, he said that he'd accept them if he wins.
Yeah, and
But of course, he's even gone back on that, charging that millions have voted illegally.
And then all of the media said, well, Trump is unreliable, using the own rules. There's never been a president who didn't accept the results of the voters. So he set up doubt.
Right.
So Truman defied the odds by hard work, and Trump had both money and hard work on his side going for him. And the New York Times, the NBC, the CBS, the ABC, the cable companies, all followed the earlier Washington Post, New York Times leadership in manipulating the polling system on television. Now, that's the important thing, television. The television companies don't care who wins. They don't care whether the Democrats or Republicans win. They just want to keep the campaign close to the very end because they'll get more money from advertisement. If they say, well, Hillary's ahead, then the Republicans put more money in it. So Hillary kept putting more money in it, and they were making money no matter who wins. So the financing of these TV, that was the biggest mistake that the parties made when they started putting TV for the Supreme Court, TV for Congress, because demagogues work through the oral tradition. Adolf Hitler was a great speaker. He was no writer of detailed memos. And of course, Roosevelt was a great speaker. He had this show. He had all the correspondents come in. He spoke to the voters directly over the heads of the newspapers, and won. The won through radio. Both Hitler and Roosevelt won through radio, and Reagan won through television. That's the difference.
Roosevelt had the fireside.
The fire. I just couldn't think of the name.
Yeah, right.
Thank you for that.
That was the radio.
That's right. He went over the heads of the Republican newspapers.
And he had this great voice.
And he said, "My friends." He had a weekly program. My friends. He had 52 shows. I looked that up on the internet. 52 fireside chats.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't as extensive as people might think, but it didn't need to be.
Well,
really.
He didn't have TV. He only had to compete with the Chicago Tribune and Hearst papers. And as I say, the fireside chat undermined. People had to read between the lines of the newspapers.
Yeah, he was able to bring his message directly to the people.
So we have a dumbing down of the American electorate. The book was weakened by the newspaper. The newspaper was weakened by radio. Television weakens the radio, and now cyberspace weakens television.
Mr. Trump does a lot of tweeting, and I understand that a tweet has to be only 140 characters long. It's a very short.
Well, he had very simple messages. Get out of here! I'm gonna win. He didn't have to have many words.
He's fond of ending up with something like sad.
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't leave much room for context or nuance or any of those traditional
As I listened
deeper
to
forms of
Trump,
thought.
I thought of Spencer Tracy and a sports announcer. This boxing thing, you know. Take him out of here.
Well, it'll be interesting. I wonder if he'll still be using the Twitter after January 20th to put out his
Well, he
statements.
doesn't need it. He's got the Republican Party established. Those newspapers, those senators, he's got the Republican Party back. He's got the three-quarters of the voters in three-quarters of the states, the governors, the state legislatures. He's got a solid Republican Party.
Yeah, 33 states right now.
And they've all rallied, except a few exceptions. Jeb Bush is not going to endorse him. He's finished.
Right.
And I guess Kasich is going to hope to run in 2020.
Is he going to primary challenge him?
Yeah,
I hope he does.
Well, I don't know. That's his. What's he holding out for?
The last two times we've seen a significant primary challenge to an incumbent president, that incumbent president lost. So I wouldn't mind seeing that.
Well, if Trump fouls up as bad as we think he's going to foul up, he could have a chance.
Yeah.
But he won't be much better. It's Citizens United. In other words, the real winner is the banks.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
The banks will get stronger and stronger.
Yeah. And, well, it looks like with Tom Price's HSS, the insurance companies will continue to sweep up the banks, insurance companies, pharmaceutical lobbies, big business in general.
So the 10 Republican candidates never united to stop Trump. He picked them off one by one. They were all egotists.
Yeah.
They could never have a coalition
That's
against
true.
Trump.
Well, there were so many candidates. He was if it was just him and one or two other candidates, they would have had a lot better shot of beating him in the primary.
And the TV people said Trump can never win. There was only one guy who suspected that.
Michael Moore.
Michael Moore. He
Yeah.
went around with his little radio and went around to all the Trump voters and warned them, I'm voting for Hillary, I'm voting for Sanders, but Trump could win.
Mm-hmm.
Watch out. Because he had experience with Flint.
Yeah, he
Michigan.
came from Flint. He knew.
He knew something
the
about
people on the
working
ground.
class problems.
Michigan is probably the closest state, actually. I think Trump only won by something like 10,000 votes, which is one reason why they're talking about a recount there.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the closest. I think you're right. And maybe that's where the Voting Rights Act would have come into play.
Yeah.
I don't know what Michigan's done after the Shelby County decision in recent years, but
Well, they talk about Pennsylvania as being, but Trump won Pennsylvania, they say, by about 60,000 votes.
right.
But they are, the problem is the voting machines in Pennsylvania are questionable, they say. That there might be a problem there. They don't have a paper trail the way we do in Ohio, for instance.
Oh, the Pennsylvania electronic voting machines?
Yeah, the electronic voting machines don't have a paper backup.
Right. Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
That's where the rigging takes place, in the county courthouses.
Well, that's where it's most vulnerable,
All right.
certainly.
So, my thesis is that history is a better major for teaching politicians how to campaign than political science. And that was one of Hillary's weaknesses. What did she learn at Wellesley College? She was always worrying about the future, not enough about the past. And our greatest presidents, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt, 1932 to 45, had in the back of their minds the biographies of previous great presidents. Lincoln understood very well the life of George Washington. Franklin Roosevelt understood the biographies of both Teddy Roosevelt, his cousin, and President Woodrow Wilson, who intervened in the European balance of power in World War I. And Roosevelt, as Assistant Secretary of Navy for Wilson, his experience came in handy in 1940-45 when he assisted Britain's Navy in the second round against Hitler, Mussolini, and the Japanese Empire. So I guess that's my concluding remarks.
Those are your concluding remarks. Well, we're getting sort of toward the end here.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left, I believe, right? So who is Trump's model then, as far as previous presidents are concerned? None.
He's unique. He's
He
the
is
only real
unique.
estate dealer who thinks he can be P.T. Barnum and win the presidency.
And
And I think he may wind up as the second greatest P.T. Barnum. That's my prediction for Mr. Trump.
yeah,
However, that prediction is based on a hope rather than accuracy.
and what's the hope of?
That Trump will at least get through his first term. He might not get through his first term.
Without being impeached, you mean?
Yeah, he could be impeached, or the CIA may have a coup d'etat, ineffective.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible if, let's say he's not impeached and the CIA...
In other words, the Constitution is in trouble. That's the basic problem.
Well, and that's my greatest fear, too, at this point, because, well, he was, even today, he was saying that people who burn the flag should lose their citizenship and should be thrown in jail. And we know that the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that burning of the flag is protected under the First Amendment freedom of speech.
Right.
Numerous times they've ruled that.
Right.
I don't think any of us here are in favor of flag burning, but I believe all of us are in favor of the First Amendment. Donald Trump gives no indication to me that he has bothered to study or comprehend the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or
That's
any
right.
of the amendments.
That is true. That is true.
And with such casual disregard for judicial review, historical precedents, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution.
He sees a lawyer to be used to manipulate the renters, collect bills.
It's very troubling to me because in the end, what we have, what our Constitution, what our Bill of Rights is a commitment collectively that we believe in these documents.
That's right.
That we live by these documents.
Okay. So we only have a minute each once, so I will repeat again. The First Amendment says, Congress can make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press and the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for the redress of grievances. Unfortunately, the law is dependent on the history of religion, and the voters have abandoned the old-time religion, theology, very much interested in pleasure. So maybe we should be talking about Spinoza next time.
Well, all I know is that I've been rereading the Federalist Papers in
Good.
anticipation of a heck of a battle before us
Right.
regarding those founding documents that we should hold sacred.
That's right.
And I don't believe that our president-elect has ever bothered to care about in his lifetime.
He knows enough Calvinism for his own family. That's about as far as it extends.
But I suppose we have a great debate ahead of us.
Okay.
And as you always say, debate is the oxygen of democracy.
Okay. Shall we come again next week?
We will. And
Okay.
We'll keep the debate going.
All
Thank
righty.
you, Professor.
Good.